bought my house about a year ago, out in one of those subdivisions that got thrown up fast on the edge of Ocala National Forest. Half the lots are still empty, just clear dirt with a for sale sign leaning in them. And mine backs right up to the tree line. I got it cheap, for exactly that reason. Nobody wants to be the last house on the street next to a few 100,000 acres of nothing. I have a dog, Duke, a mutt I got from a shelter in Gainesville a few years back. Between the job and the heat, the only time I can stand to walk him is around 2 a.m. Florida summer doesn't cool off until then, and even at 2, it's still in the low 80s with the kind of humidity that makes the air feel like something you have to push through instead of breathe. I'd rather be tired at work than walk him at 6 p.m. and come back looking like I fell in a pool. So 2 a.m. became the routine. Same loop every night, down to the end of the cul-de-sac and back along the edge of the trees. For most of that year, nothing about it stood out. Duke would sniff around, do his business, sometimes bark at a raccoon. Standard stuff for a house that borders a forest. Then, about 3 weeks ago, he stopped taking the loop. We got to the same spot we always did, right where the last street light throws a little bit of light onto the first few feet of brush, and he just planted his feet. Wouldn't go another inch toward the trees. Ears up, tail stiff, staring into the dark like something was standing right there. I couldn't see anything, obviously. It's pitch black past that light. No moon that night either. I figured it was a gator that had wandered up from one of the retention ponds, or a bobcat. Something with a scent he didn't like. I gave him a minute, he didn't relax, so I just turned around and took him the other way. Second night, same spot, same thing. The third night too. By then I'd mostly convinced myself it was a territorial animal that had staked out that patch of brush, and I started just avoiding that stretch entirely, walking him the opposite direction down the street instead. I didn't think about it as anything more than an inconvenience. Dogs get funny about smells all the time. The fourth night is the one I can't explain away. I'd forgotten my phone charging brick was dead, so I did the usual loop out of habit before I remembered and started to turn us back early, right around that same spot near the trees. Duke froze again. Same as the last 3 nights, except this time I heard something too. It was a voice coming from somewhere back in the brush. Maybe 20 or 30 feet in. Impossible to say exactly with how sound moves out there. And it said Duke's name. I want to be precise about what I mean when I say it sounded like my voice, because it wasn't close, it wasn't similar, it was mine. The exact way I say his name when I'm calling him in for the night. Same pitch, same slightly annoyed drag on the second syllable I didn't even know I did, until I heard it played. Back at me from a stretch of dark woods I was standing 30 feet outside of. It wasn't an echo. There was nothing behind me for it to echo off of, just open street. And it only said his name once, flat, wet sounding almost, like someone talking around a mouth that wasn't built quite right for it, and then it went quiet. Duke didn't bark. He backed up into my legs, which he has never done in the 4 years I've had him, and I just about dragged him back to the house at that point. Not walking, basically jogging, feeling every square inch of my skin like it was reporting for duty. The next morning, still rattled, I posted about it in our subdivision's Facebook group, mostly just to say something out loud to someone. Within 20 minutes, a woman 2 streets over replied that her cat had refused to go out the back door for almost 2 weeks, and that her husband had heard, in her words, someone who sounded exactly like him, say their dog's name from the same section of woods, different stretch of tree line than mine, days before I ever posted. Neither of us has an explanation, and neither of us has heard it since. But I don't walk Duke past that light anymore, not at 2 a.m., not in the morning, not ever. And I've started wondering how many other names in this neighborhood it already knows how to say. I drive Alligator Alley, the stretch of I-75 that cuts across the Everglades between Naples and Fort Lauderdale, probably twice a month for work. It's about 80 miles of nothing but swamp on either side. No exits worth mentioning, no cell service for a good chunk of it. Most people who drive it regularly have a story about the rain out there because summer storms in South Florida don't build up gradually like they do other places. It can be clear sky 1 minute and then a wall of water the next. The kind where your wipers on the highest settings still can't keep up and you're basically driving by memory of where the lane lines were. That's what happened to me on a Thursday a few months back, heading home a little after 5. Sky went from blue to gray to black in about the time it took me to notice it happening. And then the rain hit so hard I had to drop to maybe 30 miles an hour with my hazards on, same as half the other cars around me. That's when I saw the truck pulled onto the shoulder, hazards going, and a guy standing next to it waving both arms over his head. I want to be honest that my first thought was irritation, not concern. Because stopping on the shoulder of Alligator Alley in a storm like that isn't exactly the safest place to pull over yourself. But I've broken down out there before on a stretch with no shoulder to speak of and no way to call anyone, and I know what it feels like to be the person other cars are driving past. So I signaled, eased over, and stopped maybe 20 feet ahead of him. He jogged up and got in the passenger side, and I remember being annoyed at myself in advance for how wet my seat was about to get. It wasn't wet at all. I noticed it almost immediately, the way you notice something's wrong before you've fully worked out what it is. His flannel shirt looked dry enough to have never left a closet. His hair wasn't flattened or dripping. It was just sitting there like he'd stepped out of an air-conditioned building. I glanced at his boots out of habit, the kind of glance you give someone getting into your car, and there wasn't a smear of mud or a bead of water on them either, in rain that had already soaked through my own jacket in the 20 seconds I'd had my door open. I told myself maybe he had a rain suit in the truck, ditched it before he ran up. Something with a boring explanation. I said something about the weather, one of those automatic lines you say to a stranger in your car. He said, "Yeah, it's bad out there," in a completely normal voice, and then didn't say much else. We were still probably 15 minutes from the nearest exit with a gas station. I kept both hands on the wheel and my eyes mostly on the road. But I checked him in my peripheral vision more than I want to admit. Not a single drop formed on him the entire drive. Not from residual dampness evaporating. Not from the AC blowing on him. Nothing. My own jacket sleeve, sitting right next to his arm on the console, was visibly dark and wet the whole time. His wasn't. I didn't say anything else to him for the rest of the drive. He didn't offer anything either. The wipers and the rain on the roof were the only sound for almost 10 straight minutes, and I've never in my life been so aware of how long 10 minutes actually is. When we got to the gas station off by the next exit, I pulled up near the pumps under the awning lights and told him this was as far as I was headed. He thanked me, said he appreciated it, and got out into the rain. which was still coming down just as hard as it had been the whole drive. I watched him walk away from my car across the flooded lot toward the road, and the rain went straight through him the way it does anyone, hitting his shoulders, his hair, soaking him within a few steps, same as it would soak anyone standing in it. I sat there long enough that the gas station clerk came out to check if I needed help. When I asked her, as normally as I could manage, if she'd seen the guy who'd just walked off toward the road, she looked out at the empty lot for a second and said she didn't see anybody, and that people don't really walk off from here. Not this exit, not in weather like that. There's nowhere to walk to for miles in either direction. I moved into a rental cottage near the salt marshes outside St. Augustine back in the spring. One of those older places from the 70s with salt-rusted window screens and a kitchen that hadn't been touched since. It was cheap for the area, and the landlord was upfront that the humidity out there gets into everything, warps the cabinet doors, rusts anything metal within a season or two. I didn't think much of it. It's Florida coastal living. You expect some wear and tear. About a month in, I started finding my front door key sitting on the kitchen counter every morning. I keep it on my nightstand, always have every place I've ever lived. It's just habit at this point. But 3 or 4 mornings in a row, there it was on the counter instead, sitting in almost the exact same spot, each time a few inches from the edge of the sink. I didn't think it was anything supernatural. I figured I was sleepwalking, which wouldn't be the first time in my life, or that the thick, heavy air out there was messing with my sleep enough that I wasn't remembering things clearly. My mom sleepwalked for years when she was younger, so it wasn't a stretch to think I'd picked it up under enough stress and humidity. I told myself I was getting up, grabbing the key out of some half-asleep impulse to check the door was locked, and just not remembering it in the morning. To settle it for my own peace of mind, I ordered a cheap motion-activated camera off Amazon and set it up on top of the fridge, angled to get the kitchen counter and the window over the sink in the same shot. I figured worst case, I'd get a boring clip of myself shuffling around at 3 a.m. and finally stop wondering about it. The footage picked up motion at 3:15, the very first night. I watched myself walk into frame from the hallway, moving the way people do when they're actually asleep. Slower than normal, kind of stiff. No hesitation, like someone checking their surroundings would have. I set the key down on the counter in that same spot, a few inches from the sink, and then I just stood there, facing the window. I want to be clear about the timestamp, because I've checked it more than once. I stood at that window, completely still, for just under 2 hours. Not swaying, not shifting my weight, the way even a sleeping person tends to. Just still facing the glass, in a dark kitchen with the porch light off, so there shouldn't have been anything for me to be looking at except my own reflection, if that. At the very end of the 2 hours, right before I finally saw myself turn and walk back down the hallway out of frame, the footage picks up something tapping the glass from the other side. Not knocking, nothing that sounded urgent or trying to get in, just a light, evenly spaced tap. 3 beats, a pause, 3 beats again. The whole time I stood there, watching it, or whatever I was doing that counts as watching while unconscious, I made myself sit with a stopwatch and my own pulse the next evening just to check something I didn't want to be right about. The tapping matched. Not roughly, not close enough to hand wave away, 3 taps, then a pause the exact length of a beat, over and over, at the pace of a resting heart rate, which happened to be almost exactly mine. I called my landlord the next morning and asked, as calmly as I could manage, if any previous tenant had ever mentioned anything strange about that kitchen window facing the marsh. There was a pause on his end, longer than I liked. And then he said, in a tone that made it clear this wasn't the first time he'd fielded that question, that he'd have someone come out and put storm shutters on that side of the house, and that in the meantime, I might want to keep the blinds down after dark. He didn't ask what I'd seen. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just said it like a maintenance request he already had a template for. I put in for the shutters myself 2 days later at my own expense. Before he ever sent anyone out, I sleep with the bedroom door shut now, and some nights, before I fall asleep, I catch myself pressing 2 fingers to my own wrist, just to check what rhythm I'm actually running at.